Hello everyone, Andrew here, and welcome to the first part of my TurboGrafx double feature where I thought it would be fun to have a look at the TurboGrafx-16, open up this box and see just what is inside and what it might have looked like if you bought it back in 1989. I then want to do the same thing with the Japanese counterpart to the TurboGrafx-16 known as the PC Engine, which is a drastically different looking console, and I think it'll be fun to have a comparison between these two after we have looked at both of them. But for the TurboGrafx-16, people might know that recently it was announced there's going to be a mini version of this thing. Just like, every company has been doing with their consoles lately. It's going to have preloaded games. That's going to be pretty much what you can expect, but I definitely think it's probably going to be a harder sell because many people probably don't know too much about the TurboGrafx-16. Those who have played it, know that there are lots of great games for it, but collecting for it is very expensive, so the mini console will definitely be a good chance for people who aren't too familiar with it to have a try with it. But the story behind this thing is that back in 1989, Nintendo tried to bring it over to North America. It was actually released in 1987 in Japan, where it did quite well competing against the Famicom, even outselling it in its earlier days. But in 1989, when they tried to bring it over to North America, it was right around the time that the Genesis was coming out, the Super Nintendo was on everyone's mind, it just did not do super well at that point. So these days it's kind of faded into obscurity for the most part in North America, but when it comes out in its mini form, we'll be able to see just how much of its original kind of packaging they keep. Will the 80s, 90s totally radical guys still be on the front, or will they try to go with a more modern look to, grab the more modern audience? Who knows, but I think it's going to be fun looking at these two things, and like I said, first we're going to start with the North American version of the console, tearing this thing apart, and then in a separate part, we'll look at the Japanese PC Engine and actually compare the two side by side, which I think should be a lot of fun. So without further ado, let us open up the TurboGrafx-16. So here is the front of the box. Of course, we've already seen it a little bit, but I just really need to address again just how strange the front of the TurboGrafx box is compared to other consoles of the time. Think NES, think Genesis. You get a nice picture of what exactly it is you're buying on the front. It shows the console, it shows the controllers, it shows any games that come with it. But here, again, half the front is taken up by this guy, and then the other half you kinda get a picture of the console and the controller, but you really don't get to see it too well. So if I saw this on a store shelf beside, Nintendo's and Sega's consoles, and I hadn't heard about this from a friend or in a magazine or anything like that, I would have no idea what it was, and definitely go for one of the other two options. So I don't think that their packaging did them any favors, the reason why the TurboGrafx-16 did not do super well. But that is, all I have to really say about the front. Otherwise, let us flip around to the back, where you actually do kind of get a picture. I mean, it's cut off, so you still really don't get to see everything that the TurboGrafx-16 is about. But if we look at the box here, unfortunately mine has a little bit of damage, but it should say the next generation video game system. Back when they were called video game systems and not video game consoles, like, of course, Nintendo Entertainment System. I wonder why that's a word that phased out and console kind of took over. Down here in the corner, though, it claims to have incredible turbocharged gameplay. So, I mean, Sega Genesis, of course, had, blast processing. Well, TurboGrafx-16 was trying to coin the term turbocharged, which I don't think really stuck around, or if it did, at least, it died early in the 90s. It says that the TurboGrafx-16 has 4 times the playing power of the leading video game system. I wonder, in 1989, which system they would have been referring to that is in the lead. It also says what it includes here. We got the TurboGrafx-16 system, the TurboPad handheld controller. Well, I would hope that the controller is handheld, not awkwardly built into the top of the system. Keith Courage in Alpha Zone, so the Turbo Chip game card. So that is this thing right here. The TurboGrafx-16 actually has games that are in small card form, and since it includes one in this box, we will definitely have a look closer at that. And easy to follow instructions. Oh, thank goodness, I never would be able to figure it out if it was not easy to follow. It claims to have arcade quality graphics, up to 512 colors on a single screen. So there's debate around whether the TurboGrafx-16 is really 16-bit. Apparently, there is some parts of it that are still 8-bit in terms of graphics and such, but the 16-bit part comes from the colors that it is able to display. So there is really some debate on whether it is a true 16-bit console, but the graphics definitely do have an edge on the NES, which was out at the time, but of course the Genesis and Super NES were following soon after. So the novelty of the TurboGrafx-16, at least in North America, where it was released rather late, did not survive too long. And then it mentions the Turbo Chip game cards and awesome sound, which some TurboGrafx games definitely do have really nice sound. On the top here, you actually get a handle that you can use to carry your console around, which, 30 years later now, after it's been released, I would not dare hold it from that for too long while everything is inside the box. It could just disintegrate or who knows what. Here's also kind of a logo that you don't see too often. Like you see, the main TurboGrafx logo, but here it says the next video game generation, or is it the next generation video game? I never know how to read these kind of, circle logo things. Do you start from the top, bottom, and then go to the sides, or do you start at the top, do the middle, and then not gonna debate that for too long here. And then on the sides, we also get kind of an advertisement for some accessories you can buy, such as, the arcade pad, similar to the NES Advantage. One thing that's important to note here is the TurboTap adapter that I mentioned over here, which allows you to increase the number of players on your TurboGrafx-16 from 1 to 5, and that's really interesting. I can't think of too many other consoles where the base number of controllers you're allowed to plug in from the start is only 1, and then the TurboTap doesn't just take you up to 4, it takes you all the way up to 5, which is rather interesting. We'll definitely look more at the controller port when we open it up. The Turbo Booster accessory, which gives you AV, audio capabilities, and of course the CD add-on, which is very elusive, breaks very easily, and I actually don't have one of those in my collection. I've always wanted to get my hands on one, but they are just super, super rare. And then a little bit of a look at some of the games that you could have got for the console. So that's it for the exterior box. The bottom, not too much exciting going on. But now we're going to have a look at just what it would have been if you had opened this thing back in the day, and what the console and all that looks like when it's in there. So let's do that now. So inside the box you get these two styrofoam layers where the accessories and such are stored on top and the console is on the bottom. This is something I've seen a few consoles do, such as the Wii or the Atari XE, where rather than having this big wide box, they make a thicker box where they kind of store things on top of each other. And I think that is a cool system to use. We're going to start with the top styrofoam though, and all of the accessories, and then we will come back to that kind of bottom layer with the actual console itself. What you'll see though is on this top layer, before we actually get to anything that's in there, we actually have this kind of, this is very much like a piece of Bristol board more than a piece of cardboard, and it's thanking us for buying the TurboGrafx-16 in hopes that we will continue to have fun with it and buy more games as time goes on. This is really neat. Unfortunately it has some damage, but I can't imagine that many TurboGrafx-16 in the box probably still include this. Like, most people probably threw it out back in the day, so I think it is cool that mine includes that. But here it is, everything except for the console. And the first thing we're going to have a look at here is the controller, or Turbo Pad, which I have always thought that this is a really kind of cool mix of Sega's controllers and Nintendo's controllers, where on the right you really see the Nintendo influence, where you have your 2 and 1 buttons, just like your B and A buttons, your select and run buttons, obviously just like start and select, while on the left the D-pad is much more reminiscent to what you would see on Sega's consoles, where instead of just being a plus shaped, it is actually more round, just like, especially if you look at the Sega Genesis, but also the Master System had something similar to that. One thing that's really cool about all TurboGrafx controllers is that they include the turbo functionality right out of the box. You don't need to buy kind of a special controller for that. Every controller automatically has kind of that, rapid fire switch on it, which is really neat to have. Overall though, I really like this controller. It's very nice. It always kind of reminds me of holding an NES controller, just because of how the buttons on the right feel very much like it, and then you kind of have that D-pad on the left, which is, thankfully, it's not too round. You can still get some pretty good functionality out of that, but that is all for the Turbo Pad. Next up you have the RF box, which is intended to be included with the TurboGrafx-16. It will also work with like the NES RF box, but this one actually says, is upside down now, TurboGrafx-16 on it, so it is the official one that was supposed to be included. Over here, you get your power bar, or not rather power bar, but power block. This one's really nice though, because the block is in the middle of the cord, and the plug is just a normal two-pronged plug, so you can place this wherever you want, and this is not going to take up all of the slots on your power bar. I also don't know if this actually says TurboGrafx-16 on it. It does say NEC Home Electronics, but if you're looking for your TurboGrafx power block, make sure, you know, I think even if it doesn't say TurboGrafx-16 on it, it still is actually the correct one. Here, we just kind of have an RF cord. Well, this is the other end of that. So it's you know, plugged in from the start. You can't lose it. And here is the included game, Keith Courage in Alpha Zones. Like I said, we were going to take a look at. Unfortunately, TurboGrafx-16 cases are very boring. There's nothing on the back. You can't look at that and say, oh yeah, this is going to be, you know, a platforming adventure game, action game. You kind of just have to guess from what the cover looks like. But when we open it up here, very carefully, the instruction book is kind of comic style, and here's the game. As I said, you know, turbo card, turbo chip. It's actually called like a Who card on the front. I never hear anyone call them turbo chips. I always call them game cards. But if we take this out here, it even includes like a nice protective sleeve, and that's it. Your whole game is on this small little card. Do not bend, drop, or subject to shock. You know, sounds like good advice right there. But I've always thought that the TurboGrafx is just so cool for how its games are so small. And of course in Japan, the console is way smaller than it is in North America, as we'll see in the next part when I look at the PC engine, that it makes sense that the games were so small. But they are just really neat and fun to collect, but like I said, they're very expensive and kind of rare these days. But that is all. That goes back in there. We'll make sure that our book is not being mushed. Boom, just what you would have gotten if you had bought it new back in the day. So many people questioned the decision to include Keith Courage in Alpha Zones with the TurboGrafx-16. It's definitely not something that was really, you know, ever destined to sell consoles and move them off the shelf. If they included a, you know, more popular arcade game, it probably would have done better. But yeah, Keith Courage, it's all your fault that the TurboGrafx-16 failed. And this is just some twist ties that would have been around some things back in the day. So, with that out of the way, next up is the bottom styrofoam. And as we can see here, there is actually an advertisement for something called TurboPlay in here, which is very cool. That would have been a magazine that TurboGrafx tried to come out with back in the day. Of course, you had Nintendo Power, Sega Vision, so naturally TurboGrafx would also want to have their own kind of, you know, magazine going on. Here it advertises kind of all, you know, the cool features and stuff that you would get if you got the magazine. And on the back it says 6 full issues for only $9.95, or, you know, for me scrub Canadians, $14.95. That would have been awesome. And unfortunately it says it's not sold on in store shelves, so the only way to have gotten it back in the day would have been to have subscribed through here. So that's why I guess I probably, you know, never actually seen an issue of this. I would love to read it though. It would be fascinating to see just what an issue of TurboPlay would look like. Otherwise, we get this fold-out thing that, just like on the side of the console, advertises kind of the different accessories and such which existed back in the day, and then the other side advertises games again. This is pretty much exactly, you know, the size of the console now compacted into fold-out advertisement form. We then get the instruction manual, and this feels really nice. It has like a really nice laminated front and back, so it's not just like flimsy paper or anything like that, and it really goes into detail about everything that you need to do to set your console up. Before you set up your TurboGrafx-16 Super System and dive into turbocharge action, do these things. Save all receipts, cartons, and packaging material for warranty purposes, and because they will be worth something someday. Do not forget to mention that part. And you just get diagrams and all sorts of things. We're going to look at the console in a second anyway, so we don't need to worry too much about all this. Not like the Virtual Boy, where we really kind of analyze that manual, but it just goes on about all the things you expect. And then you actually have to flip it upside down on the other side to get the en français version. I believe this is French. It's not like Spanish or something like that. It's French. Table des materials. Couldn't have said it better myself. So, here we have what everyone has actually been waiting for. The console. And my console still actually has kind of like the protective plastic cover. I was going to say sheet, but it's more like a little plastic cover thing over the stickers, which unfortunately has started to dry out over the years, but otherwise it's in pretty nice shape. This is what it looked like when you bought the TurboGrafx-16 back in the day. It's a big kind of honking thing, almost on par with the size of the NES, except a little bit flatter. Here is, of course, where your turbo chips would be inserted your on and off switch. No light, unfortunately, to indicate when it's on, but you can tell because it, turns orange there. Here is your one controller port. Now, the interesting thing here is that this controller port is a different size from the controllers that the things like Turbo Duo or the PC Engine that we're going to look at tomorrow use. It's actually a little bit thicker, which is rather fascinating. On the side here, you get your RF input channel indicator. On the right, as you can see, there's nothing there, but what's with this thing on the back? What is this kind of big honkin' mushrooming thing going on here? Well, if we remove this gigantic cover, you will see that a lot of it is actually just air. This is what the actual console looks like, and this is where your turbo booster will plug into. That gives you, AV video compatibility, and also your CD adapter will plug into here. Also, your AC adapter input is hiding in here. So what you would normally do is plug that in, and then the cord would run through this little bit of a gap here. And that, you could plug that back in, and this is how your TurboGrafx-16 would look when sitting on the shelf. It's a very weird design. Again, put it beside the Sega Genesis and the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Super Nintendo. It definitely does not stand out as being like, whoa, in nearly kind of, the way that the other consoles do. It's funny though, because the console does not need to be this big. As you will see again when we look at the PC Engine, it is very small and compact, just like the games were. So when they brought it to North America, they said, people want bigger and more radical things. And I'm just trying to get the game out here to show you all. So they actually increased the size of the console for literally no reason other than that they thought it would appeal more in North America for the console to be bigger. But here is our turbo chip, and we can just plug that in here, and you will see that when you turn the console on, a little bit of a piece comes out here to ensure that the turbo chip cannot be not be removed while you are playing the game. It's very reminiscent of the Game Boy, actually, the very original big kind of gray brick Game Boy, where when the console is turned on, there is a little bit of a plastic piece that comes across to ensure your Game Boy cartridge cannot be removed. So I am very curious just how close the TurboGrafx Mini will look to this. Will it have that kind of removable part on the back? Will it only have one controller port from the get-go, or will it include two? Because obviously they don't want to miss out on the opportunity to sell extra controllers, but they probably also don't want to make a separate turbo tap adapter for the TurboGrafx Mini again. So yeah, it's just going to be very fascinating to see what exactly this looks like when it comes out, and there's all your information on the bottom there. So I hope that you enjoyed this look at the TurboGrafx-16. It's a really neat console. The design is not my favorite. It's just kind of like a black brick, but yet flatter than the gray brick that the NES was. But the games are awesome for sure. Definitely a lot of cool games on it. Next time though, we're gonna look at a much sleeker, much smaller, much more portable Japanese version of this, the PC Engine Core Graphics, and I hope that you will be looking forward to that. Again, it will be another good comparison point, because when it comes out in Japan, the Mini, you'll be able to see just how much smaller it is compared to the Mini that comes out in North America. So thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed that. I hope to see you next time for the PC Engine Core Graphics unboxing. So thanks, and see you later.